Genesis 6. I know I promised my time on I'll bring it when I promise. I went to the school to do it this week, and they already cleared my room out. I go find my computer and all that stuff. So I will get it. Promise I'll have it here for you. But I think I've actually given it to you before. They for people thing, kind of see just kind of the years, and they've taken the stuff in scriptures and the genealogies and so forth. Kind of piece together a timeline. Ancient Jesus did it, King Haynes and they did it. So I'll get that to you here eventually. Promise. Okay. The days of Noah, we're going to continue. We finished up with verse 8 last week of chapter 6, and we didn't really get to the preparation of the flood. We got to verse 8, which was the first 7 verses essentially of chapter 6. Kind of talking about the fact that just essentially how bad and how terrible the sin had gotten here, right, on the earth at this time. And that God was going to have to do something about it. He looked down and saw the depravity of man and all the stuff that was going on, and he decided that he had to destroy it, essentially. Verse 7 says he would destroy everything, all the creeping things, all the men, all the stuff. It reprieved him or reproached him that he had created such creatures, the way they were acting. He wasn't upset that he made them, but just the way that they were acting. He let this all the huge decide that things got this bad. That was the first 7 verses we wrote about. And we got to verse 8, and that's where we finished up with. So we've had 7 verses here now of how bad things were. And hey, what you keeping stuff? Yeah, that's it. There's your timeline, by the way. Sue is a good little student, kept it. I'm hanging on to that, and I'll have that for you next week. Thank you, Sue. Train of thought.
7 verses.
Thank you. 7 verses of sin, and he saw all these terrible things, and he made the statement that he's going to have to correct, destroy. They had to get rid of the sin. He had to judge the people for their sin, because that's who God is, right? That's what makes God who he is. He's holy, he's just, he's got to judge sin. Thank you, Pastor Rob. Then we get to verse 8, all right? And we see that in the midst of all this terrible stuff going on, right? All these people acting really, really bad. We get to verse 8 and find Noah, right? But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So, God then, of course, is going to give this message of destruction of the world to Noah. And along with the message of destruction, though, there's also the message of grace and hope. All right? Now, like Enoch, Noah walked with God as a righteous believer. Verse 9. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. In verse 10 we see that Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all the flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. So we see Noah in his righteousness, and it's probably kind of hard for us to imagine. We can kind of maybe try to put ourselves in Noah's shoes a little bit here, to think that what it would have been like for Noah and his family to be living in a world in which they're pretty much it, as far as the righteousness of God goes, right? There's pretty much nobody else that is living the way in which God had intended them to live. They couldn't count on anyone else to be honest. They couldn't count on anybody else to be upright in just business exchanges. They couldn't count on anybody else to be humble. They couldn't count on anybody else for a lot of help in a lot of cases. So it put them in a probably pretty lonely world that Noah and his family were living in. So with that being said, what do you think? What must have Noah thought about the future of humanity being a on-the-ground eyewitness eyewitness to how bad things have gotten. God's told him now, killing everybody. Right? What do you think his mindset is, being kind of an eyewitness on the ground to this state of the world?
Their own survival.
What's that?
How they would survive, how they would.
Of course, I don't think that, worried about his own survival. Knowing God has found grace and he found her, that he's been living for God, but still yet, when God says, there's going to be, he's a man, right? There's going to be a thought there for how are we going to survive this? I'm sure he was overwhelmed with the hopelessness for the people who were around him. Although there were ungodly people, and Noah still had family and friends that he would have known that were going to die during this flood. So he would have been overwhelmed with just kind of hopelessness of all that going on. And thought that all these people that he knew, probably had contact with and dealt with probably on a daily basis a lot of time, were all going to answer for their sins. Now the righteousness of this father and his three sons stood against the current evil, as you see there in verses 10, 11, and 12. And a stark contrast to the world that was around him probably would have made him some focus of some ridicule and focus of some abuse. Okay? Just because the way in which they were living, the things they weren't the things that he and his family weren't doing, that everybody else probably was doing. It was probably a pretty scary, overwhelming position to be in. There's not a police around that we know of to kind of help safety. If there was, they probably were just as corrupt. There weren't people around probably that kind of stood up for Noah. If they were, we don't see much about it. He didn't really have anybody to appeal to, as far as like a king or a person in charge, for the abuse he probably was taking. Yet it was his fear of God, not his fear of man, that directed the way in which he lived his life. Okay? Regardless of the situation, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of even the consequences of what would have happened to Noah, it was not the fear of what his peers could do to him, it was his fear of God that directed his life. So giving into the world, giving into the judgment, or joining the world that was around them, joining in the depravity, that scared Noah more than risking his life and standing. So to give in and be just like him scared, he didn't want to do that. That scared him, that's why he lived the way in which he did. Okay? So we kind of see the state of Noah and some kind of where he was at and where his family was at. Now, there are preparation of the flood here with verse 13. There are a couple of different things that we're going to kind of look at here as preparing for the flood. I will make this suggestion now. If you have not had the chance, you get the chance, please go to the Ark encounter there around the Creation Museum around Cincinnati. It's easy for us to kind of think about and kind of put in the minds that really does a really good job of putting into perspective just what Noah and his sons were able to do, how they built it, and all the stuff that's kind of going on. It's really, really cool. It's really, really interesting. There's a lot of good stuff there as well, just as a precursor. If you haven't had a chance to go, if you get a chance, please do. It's very, very interesting and be able to see that. So as we look here through the work for the rest of chapter 6 and on to chapter 7, as Noah and his family here are preparing for the flood. He starts in verse 13, and it starts off with God talking to Noah and giving him this prophetic warning that he's supposed to be telling other people about, right? So verse 13, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without pitch. And in this fashion, which thou shalt make of it, the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in the cubit shalt thou finish above. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee will I establish my covenant, that thou shalt come into the ark, and thy sons, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee, and of every living thing of flesh, two of every sort, that thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. Thou shalt be male and female. Of the fowls after their kind, of the cattle after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, two of every sort, he shall come unto thee to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all the food that is eaten, and thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Thus did Noah according to all that God had commanded, and so he did. So the Lord gives Noah this prophetic warning of judgment and death that is coming, and tells Noah that he should make it widely known by preaching and talking about it and letting people know exactly what's going on. God also has already, as we saw in verse 3 of chapter 6, determined the timeline from when he tells Noah, he'll give him 120 years essentially, to before the judgment is going to show up and going to happen, before the worldwide flood is going to take place. Now, we know record here that detail was actually given to Noah at this time. God perhaps maybe never really revealed his intended timeline to Noah, just leaving him to work and preach in light of this imminent judgment that is coming. I haven't seen that anywhere in the scriptures, but we do see through the rest of chapter 6 the explicit instructions regarding the building of the ark. It was to be of a specific wood, of course, gopher wood. It was to be covered in pitch on both sides. It was to be at least 450 by 75 by 45 feet. We had 3 decks in it, with 3 stories, and we had a window, one window in it, and a door. In addition to the animals who would board the ark, there's going to be also plenty of additional space for any people that would have heeded and listened to the preaching of Noah here at this time. Okay, and as Noah builds the ark here, and it's there, you will see it becomes more and more of a sign of coming judgment. Now, there's a lot of speculation and a lot of, I guess, fun theories we can have about talking about the building of Noah and the ark. We have to remember that these men, Noah and his 3 sons that were building this ark, would have been much more intelligent than us, because they would have been not farther away from Adam and Eve. They would have lived much longer. Their backs would have not worn out nearly as quick as ours would have. So they would have been able to get this done. And it may not necessarily have taken them 120 years to complete it. Maybe it did. They would have had to cut the wood down and get the wood and get the wood planed down and all the stuff they would have had to have done, make the pegs and things and the joining wood and all the stuff they would have had to have done. Or they could have, made it fairly quickly, and Noah spent some time preaching, and he was in the background as a reminder of these people as well. There's lots and lots of stuff we can talk about with the building of this ark that we really won't spend much time with, because the important thing is that the fact that the ark was there, people saw the ark being built. They would have seen the bow go up. They would have seen Noah and his family hauling in the wood. Some of them, Noah may have built or bought some of this wood for people who had, lumber yards or whatever the case was. Then they've been buying gopher wood for some from people. Who knows? They may have, been using other resources that people would have been working. You got to think, this is a huge civilization. There's plenty of technology during this time as well. There's maybe didn't have everything that we had, but they were getting by. They were building stuff. They were making civilization, so that they very well knew how to do these things. So people would have seen this ark being built, and the specifications that God gave. Noah was making sure that he was held to them to a T, and he would have been, as well as building this ark and probably taking the ridicule for building this ark, he was also out preaching and talking about the oncoming judgment and the stuff that was going to befall all the people that were on the earth around. As Noah was building the ark here, People would have seen the ark being built. They didn't just throw it together in a day, obviously. So they would have seen this thing being built, and it was a reminder to Noah, to his sons, and to the people that he was trying to get to come over to his side of the impending judgment that God was going to bring on the earth. Noah's building would have been intermingled with his preaching, as both the curious and the ridiculers probably came by to see what he was doing. All right, this big, huge ark, that wherever they built it around Noah's place, people would have probably walked up and wanted to know what in the world was going on. People that Noah may have been buying these resources from probably would have known what he was doing, so they brought it in. And I'm sure this is Noah being obedient, preaching to God, preaching about this incoming judgment, preaching about how these people need to turn away from their wicked ways. You can imagine the looks and the scoffs and stuff that was said to Noah. People would not even have maybe sold him anyway. He might have had a wood dealer that he was buying a for wood from, and the guy realized what he was doing, and then he said he wasn't going to sell it to him anymore, so he had to go somewhere else. We could go on and on with a list of scenarios of things that happened for Noah right here, and as he's building this ark. The thing for us to remember that is important is that Noah and his family stayed faithful, right? They continued to build. They did what they were told to do. Noah continued to preach about the judgment that was coming because he remained faithful. And he kept his 3 sons faithful as well, right? I could imagine, Noah and his 3 sons probably having some spats and some arguments about building some stuff, and then maybe trying to cut some corners because, to be honest, they're young men working, and the dad's telling them to do something. And a lot of times they're trying to cut a little corner to get stuff done. And Noah was probably meticulous, going back over, making sure what they were doing, they did it exactly right. Just direct instruction that they should follow. They couldn't cut any corners or try to get stuff done real quick so they could go see their wives and go see their girlfriends at the time. We can imagine how some of the stuff was happening. But Noah was meticulous, he was direct, he was faithful to the instructions that God was giving him. And he took probably a lot of abuse and ridicule before it. Noah dared to preach to dissolute people who had no intentions of listening to him anymore. God's approval of Noah was infinitely more important to him than finding favor with his godless contemporaries. God had given him instructions. He was going to stay with the instructions. Now, as Noah preached and built about God's grace and coming judgment, we as well as Christians have been given the charge that we should be preaching God's grace and coming judgment as well. And the word preaching there does not just mean that it's just for Pastor Rob to do from the pulpit, right? We should be doing it as Christians all the time, making sure that people are aware of the judgment that God has promised. We can look at scriptures and say, He did this once with water, He's going to do it again with fire. We can see exactly how it's going to happen. The judgment is going to be there. So we need to be faithful just as Noah was to continue to preach God's grace and judgment. Okay? Noah's message would have included obviously both grace and judgment. The message here of the ark. The message of the ark was pointless without the message of the flood. Okay? The saving grace of the ark would have been pointless without the judgment of the flood. All right? So required, and we've said both of those things. Go to 2 Peter with me, please. Second Peter in chapter 2. And look at verse number 5. 2 Peter 2 and verse 5. And spare not the old world, but save Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of ungodly. What did Peter say that Noah was preaching? The preacher of what? To say, verse 5. The preacher of righteousness, right? Noah's audience needed righteousness in order to escape the judgment and wrath of God. That righteousness would only come through faith in God. Okay? So just we see the correlation here that kind of happened between us and Noah. So what point is there in preaching the cross? Okay, if we go to the other side of this, the cross is our ark of grace. Okay, you see the correlation here. What is there the point in preaching the cross if we don't also preach the judgment of sin? Is there any point in preaching the cross if we don't preach the judgment of sin? No, right? There's not. The cross doesn't make any sense without the message of judgment of sin. Now, there's a ton of churches going on in different churches right now. If you walk into, you're going to hear a whole bunch of really good stuff about grace and God loving us and wanting us to be wealthy and wanting us to be blessed and wanting us to have good health and all these great things that God will give us. You won't hear very much about sin. Okay? And the reason is because sin makes you make the decision, right? When you couple the cross with sin, you have to make the decision. Well, I'm going to follow the cross and stop sinning. Okay? That's what that does. And that's why we don't see that going on. Because a lot of people falling away because of it. When we mention the cross, and we also mention that Jesus went to the cross for our sins, because He didn't want us to be judged of our sins and spend eternity in hell, then we have to make the decision where I'm going to be more like Christ or less like Christ. Okay? So the cross and the judgment of sin go hand in hand. And for those that prefer to focus on God's love and grace and the warm and fuzzy God, and instead of focusing on God's judgment of sin, they're simply just diluting the gospel message and failing to give the consequences of rejecting Christ. I've said this a lot. One of the great things that Satan's done is he's taken a little bit of the gospel and he's sprinkled a little bit of his stuff in there as well. And he's mixed it up to where it's just nice, warm, fuzzy feeling that's easy to take down, and it's led tons and tons and tons of people away from God. All right? And that's the effect of it. That's what he's done. And there are tons of people that are following him after that as well. There are consequences for sin. There are consequences for rejecting Christ. All right? Now, the flood would bring the very first rain ever that they would have ever seen. As we see in verse 17 here of chapter 6, on the earth, God promised that everything would die. Right? Verse 17, behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in earth shall die. All right, so everything is going to die. However, Noah and his sons and their wives will be saved through the flood by means of the ark that they are building, and on the basis here that God makes this covenant with Noah. All right, so in that way, with the building of the ark and the covenant that He gave Noah, God would also preserve all the animals by having at least a pair of each enter on the ark with Noah. And Noah would also take time gathering up food for all of these animals as well. Now, having very intently and probably very gone over multiple times in Noah's head by listening to what God had told him, being very, very intently listening to this, God's warning and the promises as well. Noah is going to obey God to the very fullest extent. Right? Verse 22 of chapter 6. Thus Noah did according to what? What's the word we see in there? All. Right? Every last bit of it. Thus Noah did according to all that God had commanded him. So did he. Let's go down to chapter 7. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee I have seen righteousness before me in this generation. Every clean beast shalt thou take of thee take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and the beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of the fowls of the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from the face of the earth. And Noah did according to all that the Lord had commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old, and the flood of waters were upon the earth. And Noah went in his sons and his wife, and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of the clean beasts and of the beasts that are not clean, and of the fowls and everything that creepeth upon the earth, there went into Noah, into the ark, the male and the female, and as God had commanded of Noah. All right, so we see as we get down here through chapter 7 that God continues to give Noah some instructions as he's building this ark. He's preaching now this message of making sure people come to God. In chapter 7, from chapter 6, verse 22, to the first verse of chapter 7, it jumps ahead here 120 years. Okay, so we jump ahead to the 120-year period of preparation for the flood. When the time draws near that God's going to send the flood, and he clarifies and gives more instructions to Noah. And we see in verses 2, 3, and 4, he talks about entering in the clean and unclean animals. The clean animals would be entering in by sevens, and the unclean in pairs. The fowls also would come by sevens. And then we see in verse 4, the final warning comes 1 week before. Okay, so let's just stop right there for a second because I want to kind of mention a couple of things. So Noah now has been building the ark. Ark probably is finished and is built before this period of time. Probably been sitting there for a little while. People have seen it. Noah's continuing to preach the gospel that the floods preach the gospel. The ark is going to do their saving grace. They quit their wicked ways, follow after the righteousness of God, and he's continuing to be faithful in his preaching. And I'm sure that during this time as well, they're gathering food up, gathering all the stuff, the supplies and things that they needed. It would have taken them some time to do that as well, to get the grain and the grass and the hay and all the stuff they would have needed during this time. And these people still would have seen this and obviously would know, would have continued to reject. Okay? Noah's telling them flood waters are coming. Noah's telling them that the earth is going to be destroyed. And I think we, even if we put ourselves in the shoes of the people who aren't Noah during this time, we've got this crazy old man who's been building this boat and telling us that all this bad stuff's going to happen. And he just continued building, tells us. I think we probably as well could have thought maybe he's a little bit loony. All right? But I think for me, and maybe not, but I think for me it's a point where if I'm around Noah, I'm Noah's neighbor, and I wake up to go to work, and I look, and animals are walking up 2 by 2 towards this ark, I think for me that would have been a moment where I'm like, maybe something's going on here. Okay? Because you got to think about this. This is a pretty wild scene, and you've seen this, on videos and different things. Can you imagine what this would have been like? Like to be Noah's neighbor, which he would have had neighbors, right? To wake up and drinking coffee, let's just put it there, whatever it was, or having tea, or whatever it may have been, before work, to walk out and maybe read a newspaper. Legitimate thing that could have been going on. To walk out on the porch and to look over, and there's just 2 by 2, here comes a lion. And then tigers, and then elephants, and then giraffes, and then dinosaurs, and then cows. And then all the things that would, this parade of, and what this is, right? This is way of God to secure the life that He's created. This is also a parade of the greatness of God's creation. Right? Noah is seeing a parade of the majesty of God's creation. And he's getting to witness it. And he's watching all these animals. Some of these animals he's probably never seen before. Okay? The land mass is all the same, all right? And he probably would have seen most of these animals, but some of these animals he probably had never seen before. And they're walking up to Noah, and Noah's probably standing there thinking, what in the world is going on? Do we have enough food? Do we have enough stalls? Right? I'm sure had these questions. And you got the neighbors there who are seeing these animals parade up and walk into the ark. And, they're not fighting each other. They're not after each other. I would imagine this was a very orderly, single-file, elementary school line of animals walking 2 by 2 up into the ark. I think for me, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think for me at that point, I would have probably thought to myself, maybe there's something to what this old boy's talking about. But as we see, it's not the case at all. There have been this. Can you imagine how long of a line this would have been of animals? They couldn't all get to the door at one time, right? Can you imagine how long how many miles it probably stretched? These animals just walking 2 by 2, and the birds flying in, probably flying through the window at the top, whatever the case may have been. So we see this happen, right? And this is why this is one of my favorite stories in all scriptures. Is because we see now just the control. Right? We can talk about creation and know that God spoke things in the light and that He made these things. But we see the true control that God has on His creation through the story of the flood. We see Him having the animals walk in orderly. We see Him having the world destroyed by a flood. We see Him generating rain. We see Him all the stuff that He does here during the flood. We see His true, vast control over creation. Now, we're going to talk about this more next week. There is a ton of people who say the flood never happened. All right? Every society, from the moment that Noah walked off the ark to now, has a story of a flood. A lot of them talk about being localized. But there is some type of story of a flood that comes from something. People don't just make this up. Right? This was a story that Noah told his family that to remind them of what God did and to continue to pass and pass and pass and pass. But as we see now, there's all these people. It continues to blow my mind. We're going to finish up with it. It just completely blows my mind that all these people would have watched this happen and none of them would have even walked up and like, you know what, Noah? You know what? Tell me again why you're doing this. What's the reason this is going on? It shows just how far sin can take our hearts and blind to the truth of God. Because this would have been an amazing thing to witness. These people would have known that something this has never happened before, right? And if this had never happened before, this parade of animals, and then Noah's also saying that it's going to rain. Well, I've never seen that before, but I've never seen this before either. You would have thought that it would have clicked in some of these people's hearts. It doesn't. And it didn't. And because of that, we see the effect of sin on people's life. The final warning comes here a week before the flood. He said the rain is going to last for 40 days and 40 nights. Every living thing is going to be destroyed in chapter 7, verse 4. Noah and his family boarded the ark with God, also bringing all of the animals onto the ark as well. And just as the way He had intended to be. Verse 9, we'll finish up. Then went in two unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. Next week we'll get to the next point of this, which will be salvation and destruction. So to verse 10, and we see now the flood coming just as God said that it would come. And talk about just mentions the precursor. Everything did is flood of water at one time, right? This is all of this would have been a build of rain coming down, water coming up, people trying to get to high ground, people knocking on the ark as it was. And there's some things here we're going to mention next week. We see the destruction of sin, essentially. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the lesson. Thank you for the fact that we're able to see these things going on. Just the mind-blowing aspects of all this. The effects of the flood as well. Continues when you're trying to look at this famous story that we know so well. It's fun to think about all the stuff that's happening. It's fun to think about all these things. And there's also a very real realization of just how many people died because they wouldn't sit and listen to what Noah had to say. So it's an important reminder for us to be faithful and consistent in our preaching